Hello folks, Dr. Taylor here. Welcome to Week 1, Module 1 of Educational Assessment. This overview video is meant as a nice introduction for you for all things assessment, what we're going to cover in this module and what we're going to cover throughout the course. It'll be a brief survey. So as a result of this lesson, you'll be able to discuss the difference between assessment and evaluation, identify the cycle of assessment, define the term closing the loop, articulate different levels of assessment measures, and identify different types of assessment. So in anything we do in life, we always ask why. So why assessment? I like to refer to assessment as the art of Kaizen. Kaizen is actually a Japanese philosophy of continuous improvement. We're all familiar with continuous quality improvement in healthcare. So it's the Japanese philosophy of continuous improvement of working practices and personal efficiency. We can certainly see how that applies to assessment in education. It means never being satisfied. Will we ever be satisfied with assessment in education? No, especially with technology. We're just moving at an exponential rate. So we're never going to be satisfied with assessment. We're always looking for ways to improve. So assessment is actually the key to continuous improvement. Look at the definition breakdown of Kaizen. K means change. We are change agents. Nurses are change agents. Healthcare workers are change agents. We're in a constant state of flux. Zen. I love the Zen. I don't know about you. I just love feeling Zen or doing Zen. And that means better. So we're changing for the better. And what does that equal? Continuous improvement. Or I like to refer to it as continuous quality improvement. For who? Everybody. When? Every day. Where? Everywhere. The art of Kaizen also assures valid assessment, reliable assessment. We'll cover validity and reliability throughout this course. So why assessment in education? Very similar to what we just talked about in Kaizen. But of course, what is the fundamental reason why we assess and we care about assessment? For best student outcomes, for best student practices. Stewardship. We depend on other people's money. Colleges and universities are in a perpetual state of looking for funds, fundraising, whatever other situation they use to obtain fiscal resources. So stewardship is huge, and assessment actually validates to people why they should give us money. Accountability. How do we measure accountability among teachers, faculties, instructors, and whatnot? Well, assessment helps us do that through different types of surveys and instruments. When we consider the definition of assessment, there is a formal definition. You can see here that it is the systematic and ongoing process of gathering, analyzing, and using information from multiple sources to draw inferences about the characteristics of students, programs, or an institution for the sole purpose of making informed, evidence-based decisions to improve the learning process. Love this definition. It's clear, it's detailed, it's concise. However, I also like Susski's definition because she gets right to the point. Assessment is actually deciding what we want our students to learn and making sure they learn it. In essence, it's all about the students. Okay, so moving forward, let's look at assessment versus evaluation, which is a confusing term for many people. When we look at assessment, we see it is diagnostic in nature. Assessment identifies areas of improvement. Assessment can be formative or summative. Assessment's an ongoing process that you can do formative assessments along the way, and you will come up with a summative assessment at the end, which would inform how you continue to move forward. Versus evaluation, which is purely summative. In evaluation, you're using the use of assessment findings for the sole purpose of making a judgment. So what are you making a judgment about? About values, numbers, or performance of someone or something. It is used as a basis for making decisions about program changes or improvements. Many times you go to conferences, seminars, and what do they ask you to do? They ask you to complete an evaluation. Why? Because they want that information to inform changes for the next conference so it can be improved for the next group that would be participating. Now, when we look at levels of assessment, and specifically education, we're looking at 3 different levels. Institutional assessment actually evaluates the overall effectiveness in achieving the mission and goals of an organization or an institution. So institutional assessment, many times referred to as institutional effectiveness, is an umbrella term for the entire organization or institution. Department or program assessment evaluates the overall effectiveness of a department or program and whether it's achieving its mission and goals. And you remember back to curriculum development or curriculum design when we talked about missions and goals and how everything has to go back to whether we are aligned with the missions and goals of the program and institution. And you can see now where it's going to come into play. And of course, the course level assessment, which most of us will be will be familiar with, often referred to as course level objectives, or now we're going to a term of course outcomes. I'll explain that more when I get into the video on PLOs, CLOs, ILOs. It evaluates, at the course level, we're actually evaluating, assessing and evaluating the ability of students to achieve stated course objectives. Now, very, very important in assessment is the assessment cycle, or what is commonly referred to as closing the loop. It's a cyclical, iterative process. It's student-centered. It provides useful feedback about what and how well students are learning. In closing the loop, you start with a plan. So what is your plan? Well, you're establishing and reviewing the course level student learning objectives and any supporting activities. You will see in your assignment in week 2, you're talking about learning activities and experiences. This is your plan on how you will assess student learning. And then you're going to act on it. This is where you provide the student learning opportunities that support these outcomes for the course. You're going to analyze the data you gather, analyze, interpret the evidence that informs how well the student learning materials, how well the student learning met the course outcomes. And then you adjust. This is where we're going to close the loop because the cycle continues. You're going to use those results and fine-tune the outcome and student learning opportunities. So remember this term as you move forward throughout the course. When we consider the different types of assessment, first we're going to consider direct and indirect measures. Direct measures are actually measuring what students are doing. So let's look at some examples of what they're doing. Writing samples, excellent example of direct measures. Performance on standardized tests. Portfolios, you're engaging in creating and developing your portfolios right now. Score gains or value-added measures. This can be evidenced by what you're doing in your journals. By the time from your first journal to your third journal in this course, we're going to see what was the value added from this course. Capstone projects. Performance on standardized tests. Thinking about NCLEX and other tests similar to that. And then we look at indirect measures, or more evaluative type processes. Think of the end-of-term course grades, course evaluations, surveys, questionnaires, focus groups, institutional benchmarks. It's a process where the institution benchmarks its findings through other institutions of learning. Are we reaching the benchmark that we set out to reach? Graduation rates. So these are good examples of direct and indirect measures. They're in your Susky text, and they'll also be found throughout your modules. Now, there's other types of assessment. You already engaged in these through your Teaching Strategies course. Formative and summative assessments. We'll talk more about these types of assessments in this course because these are what's going to inform the process of closing the loop and making improvements. So formative is actually the process of gathering information at the beginning of a course. That's important, that you're gathering information at the beginning or throughout the progression of the course. Why? For the purpose of gaining baseline information to make improvements. So you would look at journals, progressive assignments, classroom assessment techniques, You'll be engaging in them in discussion 2 of Module 2, etc. Whereas when you look at summative assessments, we're gathering information at the end of a course, the end of a unit, or the end of a program. It's usually information to be used for future cohorts or other groups of students. Have other types of assessments, and there's just a lot of different terms. And again, all these different terms are inside the different handouts in your modules. I'll be going over these terms more specifically as it pertains to the module we're working on. But when we look at embedded assessments, these are the actual assignments, activities, or exercises that are done as part of your class. In your teaching strategies final project, this is what you did. You embedded these learning activities or experiences. And you will see in this particular course that I embedded these different learning activities and experiences. And they're all used to provide assessment data about a particular learning outcome or course objective. And that is why when we write our little table of our assignments, that they're aligned with the course learning objective or outcome. Then there's quantitative assessments. There are quantitative assessments. We're focused on empirical data, statistical data, which is usually in percentages or numbers, which is obtained primarily through items such as surveys. And we use this data to inform decisions, and this is what research is usually based on. Then we can move into qualitative assessments. Now, let's think in terms of subjective, a collection of, or interpretive data. I don't know about you folks, but I'm an online shopper, and I read reviews. And they actually inform my decision of whether I want to buy that product. And that's why qualitative assessment is so important. We had a focus group during the capstone projects last week, and that informs decision making for groups moving forward. So these things are very, very important when you're thinking of assessment measures. And finally, the iconic assessment, norm referenced assessments, we think of, one educator called it the mother of all assessments, which is NCLEX. Think of all the angst the NCLEX causes. But that is a norm reference assessment which holds so much weight. So as you can see, there's many different types of assessment, and we'll be focusing on many of these different types throughout this course. So brings us to the summary. So in summation, assessment is a fundamental requirement in educational programs. It's important for us to understand that for many years, evaluation was the gold standard, but evaluation is purely summative. Assessing, the ongoing iterative process of assessment, is huge, and it's something that we need to embrace because now we're focused on an outcomes-based concept. We have moved from direct teacher-centered learning to student-centered outcomes-based learning. There are 3 different levels of assessment in education: the institutional, program, and course level assessments, and we will be focused on all 3 levels throughout this course. There's different types of assessment to measure assessment at these 3 levels. We looked at direct and indirect, formative and summative, and of course the other different types of assessment. And finally, what do we do with all this assessment data? Well, it should be used to inform decision making for continuous quality improvement. We refer to that as closing the loop. I hope you enjoyed this presentation. I look forward to meeting and working with you throughout this course. Of course, any questions, always reach out in the Ask Your Instructor blog, and I will see you in the course room.